This video is going to get us through the urinary system in lab. It starts on page 192 in your lab manual. The urinary system is sometimes called the excretory system, and that's because its main function is to excrete waste from the body. To start us out in this chapter, they talk about homeostasis again. And the reason why that comes back here in this chapter is because the kidneys are critically important for the maintenance of homeostasis for your body as a whole. They help do everything from regulate your blood pressure to regulate your blood sugar levels to regulating those waste levels that I mentioned just a moment ago. And so the kidneys are very important for the maintenance of homeostasis. Remember from lecture, if you don't maintain homeostasis, you die. And so kidneys are, again, critically important for your overall health and well-being. On the bottom of page 193, you have a picture that gives you the basic anatomy of the urinary system. My picture that I'm showing you is different. My picture is actually showing a posterior view, which means the right kidney is actually on the right side of the picture, and vice versa for the left. The picture in your lab manual is the frontal view, so that's why everything is on the flip side in that picture. Where's my pen? So, some stuff that you need to know. Not pictured on mine, so I'm going to go ahead and doodle it on there. There's usually some little triangular glands that sit on top of each kidney. Those are the adrenal glands. While they're really part of the endocrine system, they play a big role in the urinary system because they secrete some hormones that regulate how fast the kidneys produce urine. So again, that's going to have an impact on blood pressure as a whole. So they really do play a role there. Most people have two kidneys, a right and a left. The right kidney is usually a little bit lower, and that's because the liver sort of shoves it down just a little bit. Going from the kidneys to the urinary bladder, you have two ureters, again, a right and a left. The urinary bladder, everybody just gets one of those, and then there's a urethra. The length of the urethra varies depending on whether or not there's a penis present on that person. So my picture would really be showing the basic anatomy for a woman. The picture that's in your lab manual is actually showing a male, and that's because there's a little gland directly underneath the urinary bladder that's called the prostate gland. Only males have that. The urethra actually goes through the prostate gland in that picture. The blood vessels that you can see here in this picture are a throwback to stuff that we discussed back in the circulatory system chapter, but you still need to remember the abdominal aorta is the red vessel in the picture. The inferior vena cava is the blue one. There are blood vessels that extend from those to the kidneys. That would be the renal artery in red, and then the renal vein is in blue. They take blood to and from the kidneys, respectively. That is your basic anatomy of the urinary system. So see if you can answer that question as I turn my little page. Pointing to the ureter is letter D. So these are the ureters, so that's why D is the right answer to that question. Next, you have on page 194 a picture of a kidney to give you the basic anatomy of each kidney. Your picture is again a mirror image, but it still shows you all the same parts that my picture is showing you, so the basics that you can see here. Each kidney has a capsule around it. That capsule is just some epithelial tissue. It helps to just sort of reinforce the boundary of the kidney and anchor it just a little bit, keep the inside in, the outside out, that sort of stuff. Underneath the capsule, you've got this whole area. That area is the renal cortex. Inside of that, like in here, that would be the renal medulla. A lot of your organs have an outside and an inside, and when they do, the cortex is the outside, the medulla is the inside. The medulla is segmented into all of these little sort of vaguely triangular areas. Each one of those is called a renal pyramid. So there's several renal pyramids within the medulla of this particular kidney. The cortex does not have that subdivision. There are extensions in between those pyramids. Those are called renal columns. So this is a renal column. That is a renal column. Not visible in this picture, or well, you can see it actually in the picture that's in your lab manual. There are going to be these little structures we're going to talk about in more detail on future slides. They're called nephrons. The nephrons are the part of the kidneys that actually make the urine. They filter blood and help to make the urine. They extend into the cortex and then deep into the medulla. What they're going to do is they're going to make the urine. The tip of the renal pyramid is called a papilla. There's a little pore at the end of that papilla that's essentially going to drip urine into a structure that's called a calyx. Now, depending on the size of the calyx, there are minor calyces and there's major calyces. At the end of each pyramid is a minor calyx. So that's a minor, and this one right here that I've highlighted is a minor calyx. Those all merge together to create a major calyx. So there's a major calyx, and there's a major calyx. The major calyces are then going to merge together to create this structure, which is called the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is going to be continuous with the ureter, which is going to take the urine from the kidney down to the urinary bladder. So that's your basic anatomy, and then just a little intro into the functionality that we're going to see for each kidney. Next, we got to turn the page again. Page 196 is your first picture that shows you the anatomy of a nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, and when I say that, what I mean is this is the structure that actually filters the waste out and then helps to create the urine in the process of filtering that waste out. Each kidney consists of about 1 million nephrons, so there's a bunch of them. There's 2 of them in the picture that I'm showing you up here. The picture that's in your lab manual is only showing 1 intact nephron. The nephron does extend into the cortex. So this dividing line right here, the cortex is above that, and then the medulla is below. So it does span the boundary between the cortex and the medulla. This right here would be a renal pyramid, and then this is the papilla of the pyramid that has the pores that are going to be dripping the urine into those minor calyces that I mentioned on the preceding picture. Now, to give you the basic anatomy of a nephron, we've really got 2 parts. We've got a part the kidney makes, and then we have a part that the circulatory system makes. The part that the circulatory system makes is called a glomerulus, and it's this little ball of capillaries that is contained within a structure that's called the Bowman's capsule. So this little cup right there and another one right here is the Bowman's capsule. The capillaries inside of there are called the glomerulus, and I'll write that off over here as neatly as I can with my little pen. The glomerulus carries out a process called filtration, and what that's doing is it's getting all of the waste that it possibly can out of the bloodstream, and then the Bowman's capsule is going to catch that waste, and when it does, what it's catching is not urine, it's something that's called filtrate, or what I like to call pre-urine. We're going to modify that a lot so that we can save everything that's good and put it back into the bloodstream, and then just get rid of the bad stuff that we really want to. Now, all of that modification of filtrate happens in the rest of the nephron. And the names seem like they're horrendous, but they're actually named to try to tell you exactly what they are. So first, you get this little wiggly tubule. So little tube is a tubule. Wiggly is convoluted, and proximal means it's close to something. In this case, what it means is it's close to the Bowman's capsule. And so the tube that is directly connected to the Bowman's capsule is the proximal convoluted tubule. So it's labeled on this side. Here's another one for another nephron on the other side. That is the proximal convoluted tubule. As the filtrate goes through that tube, we're going to take a bunch of the good stuff that's in that filtrate, like water and nutrients like amino acids, and we're going to put it back into the bloodstream because we don't want to get rid of good stuff. We want to get rid of bad stuff. But unfortunately, the filtration that happens in the Bowman's capsule, it puts even good stuff into that pre-urine, and so we've got to put it back. And so that's a lot of what the proximal convoluted tubule is going to do. From there, I'm going to change colors. Our filtrate is going to enter this little U-turn that is called the loop of Henle. Loop of Henle is still going to be processing that filtrate. It's still going to be carrying a lot of reabsorption out. Reabsorption is, again, putting that good stuff back into the bloodstream. It's also going to be carrying out a little bit of secretion, which is how we get rid of bad stuff that maybe we reabsorbed that we didn't want to. Or we can get rid of bad stuff that didn't get filtered out when we initially created our pre-urine. Last, and I'm going to change colors again. I'm feeling purple now. We get to another small wiggly tube. So tubule and convoluted are going to come back, but this time we're far away, and the word for that is distal. So this is the distal convoluted tubule of the left nephron. And then this is the distal convoluted tubule on the right one in my picture. That is still going to be carrying out some reabsorption and some secretion to finish modifying our filtrate and turning it into actual urine. After we have urine, that urine is going to drip into a tube that's called the collecting duct. And I'm going to change colors one more time. So now we have real urine. So there's urine coming from this nephron. All of these little nubs, those would be other nephrons that they just didn't show in this picture. And then we're going to be dripping that into the collecting tubule, which is going to drip it into one of the calyces off down there. And so that is how your nephrons actually filter out your bloodstream to create your urine. Next, I mentioned these three processes earlier, but we do want to make sure you understand them. There's a picture in your lab manual on page 197 that's trying to show those processes that are occurring. I pulled this picture from an A&P textbook in my PowerPoint. It's basically showing you the same stuff. The urine formation steps are really discussed on page 198, but the picture is on page 197. So, this ball of capillaries, that's the glomerulus. There's a blood vessel that brings blood in called the afferent arteriole, and a blood vessel that takes blood out called the efferent. And the efferent arteriole is always smaller than the afferent. What that does is it creates a backup of blood. It generates high blood pressure within the glomerulus in here. That high blood pressure is going to start to squeeze the plasma out into this cup. That process is called filtration. After we do that, then we have filtrate, which is again that pre-urine. Next, we're going to take good stuff and pump it back into the bloodstream because again, we don't want to get rid of good stuff. Putting things back is called reabsorption. Last ditch effort to get rid of bad stuff is called secretion. And so that's actively pumping bad material into the kidney tubule or the nephron. That is called secretion. Once we have done all three of those steps, filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, then we have urine, which is going to go to the collecting duct so that we can get rid of it in the body. Okay. This is the model that we usually study when we are in lab in person, and it's got all of the structures that we just talked about. So first, we've got our basic kidney. There's a cortex, which is the outside part. Then all of this is all the medulla. The medulla is subdivided into renal pyramids. There's a pyramid. There's a pyramid. There are several pyramids in this picture. The renal pyramids have a papilla that is going to drain urine into a minor calyx. Minor calyces merge together to a major calyx, and then major calyces merge together to create the renal pelvis, which is going to then become the ureter that's going to take urine out. Okay, now this picture blows up a small part of this picture. So let's say we're going to take this and blow it up over here. So this is still the cortex. This is the medulla. Those blood vessels mark the dividing line between those. This whole structure is a renal pyramid. Then you've got the papilla down at the very bottom of the renal pyramid that would be dripping into that minor calyx. Also in this picture, but still kind of small, you can see a nephron here. And then there's another one on this side. So the nephron has several parts. The ball of capillaries is the glomerulus. The cup around it is the Bowman's capsule. That leads to the proximal convoluted tubule. That leads to the loop of Henle. That leads to the distal convoluted tubule, which leads to the collecting duct, which is going to take us down to that renal papilla. This part blows up this part. So we've got that ball of capillaries, which is the glomerulus, and then the cup around it is the Bowman's capsule, which means this would be the very beginning of the proximal convoluted tubule. So this is just the kidney part blown up. One of the things you can do is pause the video here, take a screen grab, and then just practice labeling it to make sure you have your parts labeled correctly. You can go back to earlier portions to just make sure you're right. This is a different model that shows you the anatomy of the nephron. This is the glomerulus. This is the Bowman's capsule. That leads to the proximal convoluted tubule, which your lab manual starts to label as PCT for proximal convoluted tubule. That takes us to the loop of Henle, which then finally takes us to the distal convoluted tubule, which would eventually get us over to the collecting duct, which isn't shown in this picture right here. Okay, so see if you can answer that one as I sort of turn the page and make sure I'm in the right place. All right, so cortex of the kidney, there's two different places where you can see that. So this is the cortex, so letter B is the best answer to that. This is also going to be the cortex because we're above those blood vessels. That would be right there. Which letter indicates the distal convoluted tubule? So distal means far away from the Bowman's capsule, and convoluted again means wiggly. So this is the part that's farther away. So E is the distal convoluted tubule. All right, next step, your lab manual starts on page 198 to discuss urinalysis, which is in the medical profession usually abbreviated as UA for urinalysis. When they get a urine sample from you, there's a bunch of different things they can do, but first is just a visual exam. What does it look like? Is it cloudy or is it clear? Is it dark yellow? Is it pale yellow? They can also do a very brief olfactory exam, which is take a sniff of it and does it smell? I've always just thought funky whenever you smell one that has a bacterial infection. It just smells funky. Fresh urine is described in the lab manual, not in the lab manual, as in an A&P textbook as being aromatic, which isn't actually very helpful. The longer urine sits in a cup, the more it starts to smell like ammonia or cat urine. But when it's fresh, it actually doesn't have all that much of a smell. It's just that it starts to smell more strong the longer you go. One of the other things that we can do is stick what's known as a dipstick into the urine, and then we would compare the colors of each one of those squares to various tests on that strip to find out, does the person have glucose in the urine, or what's the pH of the urine, so we can run other tests. Now there's also, of course, computers that can do a lot better reads, but this is just sort of an easy way to tell the health of a person with a dipstick. Now, ordinarily, we would be actually testing some fake urine in the lab so you could see how you would read these strips. But really, all you're doing after you dip the stick is you're comparing the color to each one of these squares, and whichever color it matches the closest to, like this square matches that color the best, there's numbers under it. And so you would write those numbers down for that particular test, and it would tell you, like, again, did they have glucose, in their urine? So this is a bigger version just so you can kind of see what I was talking about. So let's say the glucose test, I'm looking for my little thingy, here we go, was this color. That would mean that they were positive for glucose in their urine, which can indicate a couple of different things, but most notably, it tends to indicate diabetes. If it showed up this color, that would mean there's not glucose in their urine, so they were negative for glucose. And so we're always just comparing what color is the stick after we've dipped it in the urine, and which one of these would we say it is, and then we would record that value. Now, some problems that we can see with a dipstick. If there's glucose present in the urine, it can mean a couple of different things. But like I said earlier, most commonly what it means is that the person has what's known as diabetes mellitus, or what an average person would just call diabetes. That said, it could also mean the person just ate a bunch of donuts, and so they had high blood sugar and the kidneys got rid of that excess blood sugar. And so it might mean there's a disease condition, or it might just mean they just ate a bunch of sugar. High protein in the diet. So proteins, especially big proteins, they usually don't get filtered out, but if your blood pressure is too high, it squeezes those proteins out of the glomerulus and into the Bowman's capsule, and so it can indicate high blood pressure. Now, ketones. Ketones are something that a person makes if they are on a low-carb diet, and the current version of a low-carb diet is the keto diet. It's called the keto diet because if you are eating low carbs, your body is using fats and proteins as an energy source, and your body has to work harder to use those as an energy source. And in the process of using them, it creates ketones. Now, the only ketone that you've probably ever heard of in your life is acetone. Acetone is fingernail polish remover, and that is not something you want circulating in your bloodstream. So your kidneys have to filter those ketones out. So if you have ketones in your urine, it means you're not using carbohydrates as an energy source. Instead, you're using proteins or lipids. So low carb diet is a reason that a person might have high ketones. Starvation is another reason. But there's another really big important issue that goes along with ketones, which is if a person has diabetes, this diabetes mellitus that I talked about a little bit earlier, and they are not managing it very well, they can also have high ketones. It can lead to something called ketosis and metabolic acidosis, which can put them in a coma and kill them. So you got to really watch out for ketones. They are not something that you want circulating in your body. Your kidneys have to get rid of those. I'm looking for my colors again. Okay. So this can relate to this as well. RBCs are red blood cells. Usually, if there are red blood cells in the urine, and you are not a menstruating female, it means that you have a raging urinary tract infection. However, there are other times where there could be blood in the urine, like maybe there was some trauma, maybe like this says the woman is on her period, that's going to put blood in the urine. And so it doesn't necessarily automatically mean there's a problem. There's a reason why if a woman goes to the doctor, one of the first things they always ask us is, when was your last period? They need to know that because it affects how they interpret some results. Nitrites. Nitrites are nitrogen-containing compounds. If you have them, it tends to mean that you have a bacterial infection, most notably from E. coli, which is the most common bacteria that causes urinary tract infections. Bile is something that gets produced by the liver. If the liver can't shunt the bile into the small intestine like it's supposed to, because maybe a gallbladder is preventing that, that means your bile is going to start to accumulate in other areas, including in the bloodstream. And so if your liver's having problems, there will be bile in your urine because your kidneys are trying to filter that out. If there are white blood cells in your urine, that means you have a urinary tract infection. It could be bacterial, it could be viral. There's lots of reasons that a person might have a urinary tract infection, but it is something that's going to need to be checked out. All right. So this question goes back to the 3 steps of urine formation. Moving excess water out of the filtrate or pre-urine and putting it back, that's reabsorption. So B is the correct answer to that question. After that, we get to the questions that are actually in your lab manual starting on page 202. As always, I'll just say pause the video to make sure you can get the answers. Same on this one. Pause it so you can get them. And same on that one. Okay, bottom of page 205, you have some critical thinking questions. So I'll pause or I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. So number 1, some prescription pain medicines require a drug test. Why is that? Well, some prescription pain medicines, like any of your opioids, they can mimic other drugs in your body like heroin. And so if you're already taking heroin and you add opioids to that, you're at a much greater risk of overdose, which is going to shut down your respiration and then kill you. And so that they need to make sure that you're not already taking something that can interact with those things. 2, many doctors want a fasting urinalysis. Why is that? Well, if you've just eaten, your blood sugar level is going to be higher. That means you're probably going to have some glucose in your urine. That can make them think that you might have diabetes. And so they want you to fast beforehand because that would make sure you're not putting glucose in the urine unless you have diabetes. It's just a way for them to make sure their test is more reliable. Number 3, how does urine composition change over the course of a day? This really depends on way too many factors to have a short answer, but let's say that you have been drinking a lot during the course of a day. Your urine is going to have more volume to it. It's also going to be more dilute, which means it's going to be clearer. If you have just eaten recently, you're going to have more nutrients in the urine. If you haven't, you're going to have more ketones in the urine. And so it really, like I said, it just depends on so many different factors that there's not a short answer to that question. Number 4, friend is on a low-carb diet and using urinalysis to check to see if the diet is working. What is she checking for and why? This goes back to those ketones that I mentioned earlier. If you're on a low-carb diet, you're going to be in ketogenesis, which means you're going to be making more ketones, which means your kidney is going to be putting those ketones into the urine. So if the diet is, I'll say, working, there will be ketones in your urine. However, I want to just remind you again, ketones are toxic, and if you have too many of them, it can lead to coma and death. And so the keto diet is actually a pretty risky diet, and you don't want to take it unless you're under the supervision of a doctor. That way they can make sure your ketone levels never get high enough to put you at risk of that coma and death that I was talking about a second ago. Number 5. How does alcohol affect urine formation in the body? Well, this kind of goes back to some of those hormones that I was alluding to earlier. One of them is called antidiuretic hormone. That hormone helps keep your blood pressure up so you don't die. It does that by slowing down urine formation. Well, alcohol suppresses antidiuretic hormone release, which means alcohol makes you pee more. And not just you're peeing more because you drank more, you're peeing more because you drank more, and you're peeing more because you're suppressing ADH release, so you pee in excess of what you're consuming. That lowers your blood volume, which lowers your blood pressure, and then that promotes dehydration. That is mostly what leads to the symptoms of a hangover, and so that's why the best treatment for a hangover is to drink water. That'll get your blood pressure back up and make you feel a little bit better. Number 6, how does caffeine affect urine formation? Well, it does that in a couple of different ways. 1, it's a mild diuretic, so it makes you pee more all by itself. But 2, it increases your blood pressure, sometimes slightly, sometimes a bunch. That kind of depends on the dose of caffeine. By increasing your blood pressure, that increases filtration rates at the glomerulus, which means you're going to make more filtrate, which means you're going to make more urine. And so it makes you urinate more as well. Number 7, what effect does extreme sweating have on urine output? So sweat is actually a derivative of plasma, which means when you sweat, you actually lower your blood volume. If you lower your blood volume, you lower your blood pressure. And if you lower blood pressure, you decrease filtration rates, which means you decrease urine output. So you're going to pee less when you have been sweating more. That's something you've probably noticed just by living in Texas and playing outside or something. The other thing is, when you have been sweating more and you're dehydrated, the urine that you produce is going to be more concentrated. So it's going to be a darker yellow, and it is probably going to be, to use that word from earlier, more aromatic. That's because there's more waste in it. It's more concentrated waste than if you were a well-hydrated person at that point. So that concludes the urinary system lab. Make sure you take the post-lab quiz in Blackboard.